Most people's stories begin at birth. His began 4 days later. On a Sunday afternoon in Trenton, New Jersey, the phone rang at the home of a retired foster mother. It was the home of Juan and Carmen Maldonado. The voice on the other end of the line said they had a newborn baby boy that had been born right around the corner at St. Francis Hospital, and they had nowhere to place him. She said, "Give me 15 minutes. They arrived in 5. That baby was Jose Miguel Maldonado. Most people know him as Mike. He had 8 siblings, a mother who was one of 21 children and learned to ride horseback to corral cattle before she was a teenager, a father who helped build a church from 8 people into a congregation with 50 locations worldwide, and a village of aunts, uncles, and cousins who made sure he never once felt like the kid who had been left on the doorstep. Between the home that sheltered him and the streets that were always waiting, there was a third world, the church. The church kept him grounded. The music kept him focused. The family kept him loved. And then he turned 15. He knew where the line was. He always knew. The question was never if he would find his way back. The question was what it would cost him to get there.
Let's kick it off and see what we got.
Today we're going to be interviewing Jose, aka Mike Maldonado. Most people's stories begin at birth. Yours began at 4 days. Tell me more about that.
Well, as the story was told, my mom was a foster mom, and my mom and dad, they fostered children prior to my arrival. And they had gotten a call, I think it was a Sunday maybe, I'm not sure. They had gotten a call from DIFAS, which is part of CPS in New Jersey. And they said, hey, we got a kid that just was born and we need placement for him right away. And my mom was like, well, you guys know I'm retired. You know, I kind of did my part. Me and my husband are going into a different phase in life and so on and so forth. They said, look, we really need this kid placed. He was born in St. Francis, so it's right around the corner. We don't have nowhere else to put this baby. Right. And that could have been the thing, too, that, you know, not only are you asking to bring another foster child into the home, but it's a 4-day-old baby. That's a lot of work for people who are in their 40s. Right.
Yeah, it is.
So my mom says, you know what? I don't know. Let me talk to my husband. Call us back in 15 minutes. So my mom and dad discussed it. And then the phone rang. It was them. And she said, okay, you know what? Go ahead and bring him, but you need to find placement for him as immediate as possible. She said they must have been around the corner on the payphone because they showed up 5 minutes later with me. And she always says that, you know, I was like this big when I showed up, almost like the size of a puppy, the way she describes it.
What does it mean to you that someone was so ready to give you up that they could show up so quickly?
Yeah, so the story was not that someone gave me up. I think it was more the circumstances under which I was born, that my biological mother probably didn't have the capacity to take care of a child at that time. So that's why CPS intervened.
There's a picture from your welcome to the family that for years you thought was your birthday photo. Now that you know that it was your first day with the family, how do you feel about that?
So it wasn't my first day with the family, but so for years, there was a picture of me dressed in a suit. And I haven't seen this picture in years, but my sister-in-law had a habit at every kid's birthday party. As soon as you blow out the candles, she would take icing on her finger and just smear it on your lip, right? And I don't know if that's tradition or what, but I mean, I started doing it with my kids when I got older. But uh, so that picture I always thought was like my fifth birthday party. There was nothing that said five. There was no other indicator, but I was just looking at my, how old I looked. And I'm thinking, okay, maybe that's my fifth birthday party or what have you. So the same sister-in-law that smeared the icing on me years later told me, matter of fact, I think I asked her, I said, was this my fifth birthday party? And she said, no. And she stopped, right? She paused. I said, then what was it? She said, that was us celebrating your adoption. So I went from, a foster child that my mom said, hey, look, find placement for him immediately, to becoming part of the family, legally, officially, right? I was already part of family in every other way. But in terms of you asked me earlier, before we got started, about the Jose and Mike. So I was born Michael Figueroa. Okay. My mother was born in Ponce, Puerto Rico, my biological mother. And at some point they had moved to the States. And when I was adopted, my father changed my name to Jose Miguel Maldonado. So I started pre-K, and I started pre-K as Michael Figueroa. So in kindergarten, right before kindergarten, that's when my name was changed to Jose Miguel Maldonado. But for some reason, I was signed up in school as Michael Maldonado, right? And because my name was Michael the whole time, the friends I started making, neighborhood people, and even my mom would call me Mike sometimes. So in school, everybody from kindergarten all the way through high school, they know me as Mike Maldonado.
Okay. Paint the picture of where you grew up as a kid. What did the block look like, feel like, sound like coming home from school?
Okay, so I always say it may seem extraterrestrial to someone else who didn't grow up in that sort of environment. But to me, if now that I'm older and to look back, I would have to say it's like, think of like one of the worst parts of Baltimore, and like Beirut, kind of, sort of. And I'm saying that in the physical visual, and also a little bit like what it was like. Now, inside the home, I was completely safe, and it was a wholesome environment inside the home. It was not that outside the home. I mean, there were a lot of fights. There were fights, meaning whether I was involved in the fight or someone else. People fighting after school. After school, two people would agree to fight, so we would all go to the alleyway and we would be sitting there watching and whatnot. And then the teachers tell you, if trouble's this way, go the other way. But we're kids, so we just that's excitement for us, But I grew up pretty much in a dog eat dog environment. I grew up 2 streets away from the worst street in Trenton. And it was Walnut Avenue. And my mom used to always tell me when I was little, listen, you could play outside. You can go, ride your bike up the street or wherever you want to go. I don't want to catch you on Walnut though.
Now, you grew up in a household with 8 siblings.
Mm-hmm.
That's a full house. Like, what was the chaos like growing up in that?
So there wasn't any chaos because 6 of my brothers and sisters were already adults and out of the house. It was just the 3 of us, me, Jeanette, and Yvette. And so the twins were 5 years older than me. And they had gotten to the home. So they're also not biological children to my parents. So they had gotten to the home at 6 months old. So they were there probably a good 3.5 years before I showed up, or 4.5 years before I showed up.
Okay. So beyond your parents and your siblings, you had a lot of extended family and cousins. Who were they and how did they impact your life?
Okay. So my mom is one of 21. My dad is like one of, I can't count right now, but I'm assuming it's somewhere between 8 and 10. It was enough. My dad's father and his mother, they had, I think, four children. So it was my dad, my uncle Faustino that died 11 days after my dad, my aunt Marina, and my aunt Tiva. And you know what? Tiva may have been older. I'm not sure. Anyway, so between they share the same mom and dad, the first four. But then came, I want to say like another five with the new wife. One of them is the pastor's wife. He's still the pastor of the church. But the funny thing is, my paternal grandfather married my mother's aunt. So she was my great aunt and like my grandmother at the same time.
Wow.
Yep. You talk about colors of the family. My mom's brothers and sisters go from like Spaniard to Indian looking to very dark, right? Same mom and dad. My aunt, Juana, she is also my godmother. She has a daughter, my cousin Idalia. So shout out to Idalia. So I was very close to Idalia as a little kid, very little kid, right? I mean, she would come and like braid my hair in cornrows, which was probably never seen in that house. And I remember as I got older, she would pick me up and we would go downtown Trenton. And, it's crazy because when I got older, downtown Trenton looked like nothing. But as a kid, it looked like this huge world, right? But she would take me to these places. She would take me to the mall. And we were at the mall one time and she bought me my first pair of Sergio Valentes.
Okay.
I don't know if you're
a little.
I don't know if you remember Sergio Valentes.
Not, but I can envision.
So this has to be like early 80s. We're talking about like maybe like 82, 83, something like that.
I was one.
Okay. Thanks for that. I appreciate it. Yeah, so I remember the jeans costing $30.
Wow. That was a lot back then.
It was, right? So in the household in Spanish, we didn't refer to them as Sergio Valentos. My parents did not know what Sergio Valente, Sergio Valente
or probably how much they cost.
So all we did was call them the $30 jeans in Spanish, right? And because Idalia bought me these, I would try to wear them as much as possible. They were my little connection to her,
Okay.
Also, she's like I'll show you a picture, but she's like a almost like a darker Indian look.
Okay.
Right. So, yes, I was very close to her. My sister Gladys, very close as a baby. I was not even 2, rubbing her pregnant belly. She was pregnant with my nephew. My nephew was born about a year and a half after I was, or after I came to the home. So me, same thing. Me and Gladys, I call her Maida. Me and Maida, she would take me downtown, this, that, and the other. Again, she was like a second mother to me, right? So think about it for a second. So I have my mom who's very nurturing. I had my sister, Maida. I had my cousin Idalia, right? And to me, that was just like the tip of the iceberg in terms of all the characters in play. I've talked to some friends. I was in Puerto Rico early last year, and I was talking to a friend of mine, and I think the question came up, did you ever feel like not loved? That was never my problem. When I tell you there was layers and layers of family, and you would have thought that it was like maybe some sort of Annie type, adopted kid, redheaded stepchild that you make clean and do this and treat them ragged. It was the opposite. It was almost like, for the moment, I was the star of like the family. Everybody wanted to see El Moyo, right? Which means a black kid or a black person. In Spanish is a slang that we use. But as a term of endearment, right? As a matter of fact, I think my aunt in Puerto Rico called my other aunt in New York, and she had told her, "Oh, well, El Moyo just left," right? And she said, which Moyo? Moyo de Carmen, right? Carmen's Moyo. And that's how we identify ourselves in the Puerto Rican culture, as far as from what I experienced. But back to the question, yeah, it was just it was an experience that as I got older, my brother told me one time. He says, as a police officer, I've gone into all these homes in this neighborhood and different neighborhoods, and I see how people live, and I see how kids are treated. You've never been treated like that, right? And to me, it meant nothing at the time. I didn't know what it was until I got older and I witnessed how people lived, where it was like below, your average standard, right? Whatever the base standard is, it was below that, right? Or how children got treated or hurt, abused in any way. And again, at the time, I would have never believed it, at a younger age. I had to become an adult and like see how people suffer, how people live, how children suffer because of the circumstances of their families. So, but that was never the case for me. So much so, I was in Puerto Rico in last May, and I had not seen my Uncle Reyes in 20 years or more, right? He used to live in Trenton. Then he moved to Florida for 22 years, and then he went back to Puerto Rico. The previous visit, I didn't take a lot of time to visit folks. I was doing my own thing. So this time I wanted to make sure I visited everybody. And conveniently, most of them are all in one neighborhood, so I ain't got to worry about that. And I played a trick on him. Remember, I haven't seen this man probably like 25 years or more. It was a long time. And so what ends up happening is he's sitting on the porch. I pull up. I get out, right? And I said, I'm looking for Reyes, is what I said. And he says, yeah, who's looking for him? As he's doing that, I'm kind of undoing the lock to get into the driveway. There's gate in that neighborhood. There's gates on every driveway. The porch might have bars on it. And I'm coming up close. He comes out. He starts shaking my hand, and then he calls me by my childhood name, right? And it was interesting because it was kind of like that with everybody. I did the same thing with my uncle Elias, who also used to live in Trenton, but his wife had come outside, and she immediately recognized me. The only one that didn't was my aunt Rita, but poor thing, she's suffering from Alzheimer's. So
Okay.
now, if I remind her who I am, she's, oh yeah, that's the other one. So as me, her, and her son is talking, 3 minutes later, she'll be like, ¿Y quién tú eres? Who are you again? Listen, we're laughing, but it's only because, she was such a loving lady. She still is, but, at an older age, suffering from that disease, it's hard, But the thing is that I want to absorb as much of her as possible because even though we visited Puerto Rico when I was younger, that had stopped at a certain point. And I think there was one time I had not seen them for 20 years. And then it was like 2004, 05. I went to go out there the first time in 20 years. And I'm very close to a lot of my family members there to the point that, I still stay in contact, probably speak to my one cousin 2-3 times a month.
Okay.
Yep.
So around the time that you were in middle school, a gentleman named Tommy came into the picture. Can you tell me?
Tommy, shout out to Tommy. Yeah, so my dad was the treasurer of the church and had been for a very long time, since the church started. It was 8 of them that started. My mom and dad were 2 of those 8 pioneers that started the church. And he was treasurer then. So he was treasurer throughout, I want to say at least 3 or 4 pastors. And the most recent pastor has been the longest running one.
Mm-hmm.
So it's 8 people. Now you're talking about a church that has, probably 50 churches under them globally. They've gone to different places to inaugurate these churches, and ended up buying one building, one church, and we were there for some years. And then they bought a bigger building, converted that into a church, and then they bought a Masonic temple that had been foreclosed on. So they made a lot of progress, and these were not Rhodes scholars. We're not talking about MBAs here. You're just people that with faith and a dream and the willingness to put in the work, right? So it was a tightly knit church family. So we took a trip to Six Flags Great Adventure. And while we were there, we ran into another group that Tommy was a part of. So Tommy is black. Not that anything's wrong with that. Uh, Now, my uncle had told my friend that when we were visiting Puerto Rico. Anyway, so my biological uncle, by the way, we'll get to that. Um, so Tommy's black, but his Spanish is almost perfect. So obviously he studied other languages and had been practicing the whole time. Uh, Tommy worked at the time. I think he worked for Vanguard. He had lived in Canada. I don't know if it's Toronto or something, but he had lived in Canada and he was fluent in French, right? So anyway, the groups met each other, say, hey, well, we go to a church in Trenton, so on and so forth. He lived in Philly, Tommy, and then he started coming to the church and was enjoying it. And he would make that trip from Philly to Trenton maybe twice a week to come to church, right? Um, and I don't know, we connected somehow, and then he would come to the house sometimes, and he would help me with my homework. And at this point, I'm probably 15 years old or something like that. No, I'm lying. I'm probably 14 because I was still in middle school. So when I turned 14, I was still in. So I was in ninth grade, but at the time, ninth grade, they still housed that grade at the middle school, not at the high school, right? It was so my ninth grade year. The next year, they moved ninth grade to Trent High. So we had an influx of Haitian girls, right? And I really wasn't interested in most of them, right? But there was one, and she was kind of light skinned, not as light as you. She was kind of light skinned. I want to say her name was Rachel, something like that. I'm pretty sure it is. Maybe, I don't know. Who cares? But I told Tommy, listen, they speak some sort of French Creole, but I need you to teach me some French because I'm on a mission. Okay? Listen, I like to study my subjects. Okay?
Okay.
Or should I say, what is it in Criminal Minds? The unknown subject. So I figured, like, look, let me learn a little bit, parlez-vous français, laissez-vous parler, comment allez-vous aujourd'hui, right? And Tommy helped me out, and he started teaching me these things. I said, no. I said, I'm going to give you what I need you to teach me. And I would write it down, and we practiced that probably for a couple weeks, and he became a good friend, to the family, to the church. And yeah, but it was all from that trip from Six Flags Great Adventure that the connection was made.
Well, I have to know, how did the delivery go when you went up to Rachel to show her what you had learned?
Well, I practiced on the other ones first. Listen, I'm gonna tell you something, Kimberly. Mama didn't raise no slouch. Okay, my mom was not an educated woman, and I told you she was one of 21. So in the fourth grade, her being one of the older ones, they pulled her out of school to help take care of the other ones, right? And my grandfather, her father, he managed, from what I know, he managed ranches and farms for other people, right? So they lived on one, but my mom and some of her sisters and my grandmother, when the workers would show up, they're the ones that prepare like the buttered bread, the big huge batch of coffee, and all that stuff, right? So much so that as my mom got older, um, she told me that when her father was tending to another farm or ranch or what have you, and the storm was getting bad or they had to bring the cattle in, her and my aunt, who's my godmother, would get on bareback horse and corral the cattle. And listen, you got to think of a kid from Trenton, New Jersey. Imagine his mom, who's now, middle aged, yes. older woman, riding horseback like it ain't nothing, But I could tell that it was true, and not because everything she ever told me was true, but more so because, like, we would grow tomatoes and peppers and things in the backyard, and they would make something like sofrito, which is like think of like a green sauce that they make for oxtails in Jamaica and things of that nature, or throughout the Caribbean, right? But it was these things that I could tell that she wasn't lying, because the Puerto Rican culture was rich in my home.
Mm. So it sounds like you grew up in a pretty religious home, but a very dangerous neighborhood. How did your parents hold the line?
I think it was through instruction and example, right? I think that's why it was necessary to have those mentors in your life, right? In a kid's life, because parents, we're authoritative, right? So I'm gonna adjust myself a little bit. So there is nothing that you could do to convince your 4-year-old daughter when she turns 13 or 14 and she's hiding little things, that you cannot convince her to confide in you certain little kid teenage things, right? How we bridge the gap is through mentors. So you got the kind of mentors that can teach you a thing, a trade, a craft or something, right? But you also have the ones that they're just there to be like the buffer between your peers and your parents, right? Your peers, if you do dirt, they're not going to come tell your parents,
Right.
right? A mentor you can confide in them the kind of dirt, they can see the dirt that you're doing, and whether you are safe or not, right? They can decide whether or not to mention it to your parents, right?
Right.
Now, if it's harmless, if it's innocuous, they probably just let you do your thing because they know it's part of growing up. But if they notice that, hey, this is a little bit too dangerous, they're going into unsafe territory. Maybe I should put a bug in the parents' ear and let them know what's going on.
Okay.
So I think mentors are important. Again, some teach you specific things, and some just there to kind of like help you grow. To me, it's almost like think of like if you go to college and you got algebra 3 and you're struggling, you go to the learning center or the student center and you tutor for 30 minutes before you take the exam. So think of them like as a tutor to kind of bridge the gap between the teacher and you completing the course.
Okay. Okay, so what would you want people to know about your elementary school years? What would they need to know to understand what came next?
So for the most part, elementary was good, right? I had the privilege of going to PJ Hill. Shout out to my PJ Hill crew, Carlos Santiago, Farida, and all of y'all. Um, so PJ Hill, Patton J. Hill, it was named after Patton J. Hill. And it was a newer school. So I went there for pre-K. Then I went to kindergarten to Paul Robeson, which is attached to the middle school I went to, which was junior 2. Um, but I ended up going back to PJ Hill for gifted and talented. Most of my elementary school years were cool. In 4th grade, I had a music teacher named Mrs. Stieber, redheaded lady. God rest her dead. I think she passed away. Mrs. Stieber came to the classroom and looked around and said, "Okay, Michael, come with me." So I'm like, "Okay, so why am I going and not?" But I know I wasn't in trouble because she's a music teacher. I mean, you don't take music, art teacher. Elementary school, you don't take them seriously. I don't think you take them seriously in any grade. Okay, this is like a fun period. Well, she put a cello in my hand and taught me to play cello, right? And I think that's where the connection with music came, because I realized my creative brain could flow through this a lot easier because it was, I was just intrigued by it. It's almost like you got this big canvas, right? And you can fill it with certain things. Now, you can fill that up with beautiful music. You just have to learn how to play, right? And I would carry this big thing home with me and so on and so forth. And I played cello through the 9th grade. No, through the 8th grade. 9th grade, the bass player Simon. Shout out to Jamaican Simon. He moved on to the high school.
Mm-hmm.
So I became the bass player. So let me rewind a little bit because I just went from elementary, 4th grade to 9th grade. So around 11 or so, my dad bought me a keyboard. I don't know if I asked for it. I seriously doubt I asked for it. And I didn't know anything about a keyboard, right? Had been playing the cello, didn't know anything about keyboard, piano, or anything like that. There was a store called the Sears Surplus Store. And it was on Route 33. And my mom would frequent there all the time. It was right next to James Way. So it's not like thrift stores today, and it wasn't a thrift store, but basically whatever was sold at the Sears main store, if it was returned, they would send it to the surplus store, right?
Okay.
But it surely would be missing something. Okay. So there was a book series, very thin books, right? And it was music books, and it would teach you how to play from like basics to like actually putting a melody together, right?
Okay.
It was missing. I think I had book 1, 2, volume 3 was missing, and I had volume 4. But listen, when you come where I come from, you put something together, you make things work, right? You know, if I got 1, 3, and 4, that's fine. We'll figure out how to bridge the two to the 4 and the 3. We'll make up the 3rd volume in our head. I started practicing certain things. So I started learning the notes. Then I learned the triads, the chords, right? And then more complicated, well, not complicated, but more advanced chords, right? So triad, a chord just takes 3 notes to make a chord. But then you can add like a 4th and make it a 7th or a 9th, major 9th, minor 9th, what have you. So started to practice some of that. Figured out what the actual structure of a song is. And it's the 1st, the 4th, and the 5th. Any music major or anybody who plays music knows what that means. That makes up a song, right?
Okay.
So then I was practicing some of the melodies, Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. And I remember being on the living room or being in the dining room, I had my keyboard, my Casio keyboard, battery operated on the table. It had full-size keys. And I had started playing the Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. And my dad from upstairs said, "Oh, I hear you. Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star." So again, when he bought me this keyboard, I didn't know how to play. But then I came across this book. So something in my mind knew, hey, you know what? Let me get this book. This book will help me play the keyboard. And it got to the point where I learned how to play the theme song from like St. Elsewhere, and you know, because all those was in the books. Remember, I had to skip from volume 2 to 4. So to this day, I do not know what was in volume 3. There's one more thing I want to say about the thrift store. I mean, not thrift store, the Sears Surplus. So everybody had Atari, and I mean everybody. So at the Sears Surplus, my mom and dad, well, I found it. Say, hey, look, they got this Atari set. Boom, boom. I don't know how much it was worth. So he bought the Atari. I said, oh man, now we got Atari. Take it home. I didn't know how to connect it. My cousin Miriam, right, pastor's daughter, she came over not too long after, right? That's the thing. So after Sunday school, a lot of the times, my cousins, you know, adolescents to teenage years, they would come and hang out at my house until we had to go back to church for the second service at night, right? So she started connecting the Atari, and she said, well, where's the adapter? Where's the plug that goes from the TV to the unit? It was missing that. So now I'm sitting here like, I'm thinking like, as soon as Miriam gets here, she's going to connect this thing and we're going to be ping ponging away. Okay. I'm a ping pong the out of it. Right. So that was pretty much my whole Atari aspiration.
Oh, you never got connected.
My parents returned it, and that was it. You know, they did returns.
Yeah, I know. I'm thinking too about returns.
Hold on, wait. So, hold on. So, Um, I really wanted that Atari. But so so I had started playing cello in the fourth grade, right? Fifth grade.
Mhm.
I want to say by the time I got to the sixth grade, probably going into the seventh, I noticed that some of the musicians in church would be absent sometimes. So I'm like, wait a minute.
Did you volunteer?
That would be an opportunity for me to play. But what if the bass player would be out? Well, I didn't know how to play bass. Right?
Okay.
So I started with guitar.
Okay.
And it was a similar deal. I found some kind of book, right? We had the older musician Benny. Shout out to Benny, Benny Lebron, and and there was a shift because the music was kind of like older style, and then when the younger musicians started taking over, it was a change,
Right.
And some of the older folks were not happy,
Not thrilled about it.
But so I learned to play the guitar. So now I can fill in for the guitar. I'm not like a guitarist, right? Mm-hmm. I'm not going to be like Van Halen, doing all these riffs and whatnot, mm-hmm. but I can carry the song, right? So then I said, well, I can figure out the bass. The bass is just the last four strings of the guitar, right? But it plays a different role, right? Because it's lower in register and it's kind of like the foundation that carries the tune. So I figured that part out. So now I can play the congas, the timbales, the keyboard, the guitar, the bass, and the drums. So no matter who's out, I'm just glad we didn't have a saxophone player. But no matter who's out, I could play. And that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be up there. I just enjoyed it so much.
So is this where you ran into Ivan?
Yes, Ivan was the keyboard player for the church.
Okay.
And he was, at the time, he was dating, well, he had been dating my cousin, who's the pastor's daughter.
What do you think he saw in you that you maybe didn't see in yourself?
I have no idea. Maybe they paid him to hang out with me. I don't know. I don't know. But we became really cool. And we would visit. I remember we even went to New York to go to a Sam Goody store up there. So we would visit different music stores. So he was really into music too. Shout out to Ivan, Pastor Ivan. But yeah, my love for music grew almost to the point that, my obsessive compulsive personality, like that's all I wanted to do. It was like my brother Dave had kind of reeled me in at a certain point and says, well, let's make sure we get the studies out the way. So that way, if your music career never takes off, if you choose to pursue it, at least you've got some other academic, branch that you can fall back on.
Who were you behind the instrument? What did that version of Mike feel like?
I don't know. I just, when I tell you I enjoyed it, I really don't know. And it's funny because I don't play as often now, right? But I've been a part of studio sessions, certain concerts, both Christian and secular. Um, I I don't want to say it was like, oh look at me, I can do this. It was it. I think it took me to a place where I'm in my own zone, but still present. And I don't know how much of me smokes. Oh, sorry, I don't know how much of me spoke through the music, but I remember uh, my godmother, Titi Juana, um, her her oldest daughter Irma. Shout out to Irma. Um, she came up to me after one of the services. I think this day, I forget what day it was, but it's got to be. So we had church on Sunday school, and then the service at night. Then Tuesdays was, I think, um, the youth, right, which they had included the juveniles and some of the younger youth, and then Thursdays was the women's service, and then the men's service was Friday.
So y'all were just at church every day of the week. Almost.
Let me tell you something, okay? We were coming out of the house, right? Loading, getting piling into the station wagon, 1975 Chevy Malibu. It was blue with the wooden cladding, right? Malibu classic. And Tanya from next door, shout out to Tanya. She said, "Dang, y'all going to church again?" We went to church so much that the neighbors' kids got tired of us going to church.
Oh, Lord.
So we lived in church. Now, those services, right? So the women's service and the men's service was the least in attended service. And then at a certain point, they combined the Thursday and Friday service, and I'm not sure if they picked Thursday or Friday. I'm not sure. So the men and women were together, right? But one service, I was by myself. There was no other musician there, right? So I played the keyboard. I pulled out Ivan's, synthesizer. It had like a Roland something, and I played. I noticed my cousin Irma like locked in, like she was like in a trance, like watching me up there. And after the service, she said, "Listen, I got to apologize to you." And I said, "What for?" She said, "The whole time I thought you were up here with the guys just faking. And I realized tonight you actually know how to play." Thanks, Irma. Yeah.
So faith is pretty foundational for you. It seems like it's
So it is. I think faith is foundational, period. I don't care what you believe. I don't care what religion you practice, if you practice one. There's a spiritual side to all of us. And, you always have to believe in something. There's no one out here who's conquered anything, achieved anything, has, climbed to the top of the mountain that did not believe in something. Because to me, if you can't believe in something higher than you, I don't know how much it could prop up that feature of believing in yourself.
So was there a particular moment when it became more real than religious, when God became more real than religious for you in your church career?
I was noticing some things. So I did a lot with music, especially in the church.
Mm-hmm.
So the church, they had the youth. Once we made that conversion to where like now the church band is all young people, they had a group called Young Crusaders. Ivan was a part of it. Dorcas, I don't know if Milka, God rest her soul. Eventually Stevie, God rest his soul, came to be a part of it. Cito, Rolo, then Joel or Joel, who was another mentor, by the way, Joel Ramos. Shout out to Joel. So there was a shift, and we would go to coffee houses and play. We would go to other churches and play. We would play where there were other groups there. And again, this was mainly them. I was like the one who set everything up, set up the microphones, put the drums together, break it all down, boom, boom, which is why you can see that video production is not so much of a chore for me. But that was them. That was them allowing me to make my bones, right? Because, hey, if you want to play sometimes, you're going to have to earn your spot. Okay. I remember Dorcas got married. So Dorcas got married. She was in Young Crusaders. Her family also pillars of the church and community. She married a brother named Tito. And at their wedding, me and Ivan came up with a thing. So we did "Don't Worry, Be Happy," but we changed the lyrics to kind of suit her and her new groom. And it was hilarious. Now, this is a sanctified church. Pentecostal, by the way, Assembly of God. Okay. I don't know if that explains a lot, but anyway. But the pastor, when we performed this number, we noticed the pastor took interest and was like watching us and not being amused. You got to remember, it's a big thing. Secular and Christian is two different things, mm-hmm. right? So we couldn't be involved with secular music or anything secular. Or we could be disciplined. Mm-hmm. We could actually be sat down and not allowed to play any function in the church until the pastor says so. Mm. So I remember we get past, I think we get past the second verse. So it was chorus, verse, chorus, second verse. We started going into the chorus. There was a third verse, and Ivan kind of looked over and whispered, "Listen, yeah, Pito's looking at us, man. Let's cut it here." And we just kind of faded it out, closed it out, because I think what we did, I think we kind of pushed it close to that line, but it didn't merit us getting disciplined. So thanks to Pito, who's also my uncle. He's my aunt's husband, the pastor.
I would ask if church kept you out of the streets of Trenton, but it seemed like y'all were at church every day. So
we were. When I tell you, home and church was a completely different world than the neighborhood or going to school with the neighborhood kids. Completely different worlds, to the point that you had to learn to adjust. A bit abrasive. You had to be a little bit rough around the edges to kind of get through the neighborhood school life. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, but it can't, again, I don't know that I looked at it like that. This is just how it was, So just imagine a cheetah growing up in the wild and it has to learn how to hunt, kill, and to the point where, okay, mama's teaching you up to this point, but then now you're on your own. Mm. And some don't survive. You see this in the documentaries. A lot of male cheetahs die in the wild.
So something happened around the age of 15. What was life like then?
So